We're good? Fantastic. Good evening and welcome to this Ask Me Anything About Property with myself, Saj Hussain. First of all, thank you so much for giving up your time to be here. The intention with these weekly Q&As is to really help you get further faster in your property investing journey by allowing you to pick my brain and help you with whatever issues and challenges I may be able to do so using my experience about 14 odd years within the property industry and using a lot of creative strategies to build wealth within property. So whatever questions you've got that you want some help with, please pop them into whatever platform you're watching on, because right now we're live on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube, I believe. So pop your question, whatever platform you're on, and Khalid will hand me the questions as they come through. We'll answer as many as we can in the time that we have this evening, which will be about half an hour. What I would do, first of all, I'll start with running with questions that were left unanswered from last week, and then we'll get going from there. So I'll just go and grab those questions to start with. So the first question that I'm going to do from last week, which was left over, was on LinkedIn from Hamid Ahmed, who's a customer care manager at Persimmons Homes. He says, Saj, good evening. I need to find out what is the most cost-effective way of flipping property. I intend to use my own funds to flip 1 or 2 properties a year and later reinvesting all profits back into the fund. Personally, at this stage, I think a limited company would be a good vehicle. What do you think? So this is a great question. Primarily, it's a tax question. I'm not in the best position to be able to give you tax advice. I can give you some general views on what I think, but it's really important that you get tax advice for this. So the reason this turns out to be a tax question, because ultimately what we're saying is, when we say what's the best way, there's a number of factors we need to think about. One is, how can we be tax efficient? This is not about avoiding tax. It's about being as efficient as you possibly can by using everything that's available to you to minimize the amount of tax you pay. Look, it's great making money from houses, and with houses you make significant profits potentially, and so you want to legitimately minimize that tax as much as you possibly can. The other thing also to think about is if you're raising money on that purchase. So if you're buying a property to flip on, and if you're borrowing money from a bridger, a lender, how is that going to work, and is that going to cause any issues or problems for you depending on the structure you've got set up? So if you've got some complex offshore trust or something you've got set up, you might find it difficult to borrow money against that in terms of your flipping deals. But ultimately, it's about thinking about being tax efficient. So in a nutshell, if you're purchasing a limited company, your profits are going to be subject to corporation tax that you're going to have to pay tax on before you extract those funds out, as possibly dividends, and then you've got to pay tax on the dividends as well. Because remember, if you're making profit within a company, it's actually not your money. It belongs to the company. Now, you may own the company, but ultimately it's the company that's made those profits. So it pays taxation on that, and you're extracting money out. So be careful of double tax, which effectively you're paying tax twice on earnings that you've created. But overall, it's about how much are you ending up with net in your pocket after the transaction. And let's say you purchase in your personal name. Look, I don't know your situation right now. Maybe you don't own a property. Maybe you decide to buy a property and use it as your home, and that becomes your principal private residence. So you purchase that property, you do some work on it, you move into it, you live there for a few months. Then, you decide you might want to move on, your circumstances change, and you sell that property, and then your taxation is going to be very, very different, i.e. you're not going to have any tax to pay on that because it's your personal private residence. So there's no tax to pay at all. And your stamp duty will be much lower or none at all, depending on the purchase that you're doing. So it can make quite a big difference to the overall net amount of profit you're extracting from a transaction, depending on how you set it up. As I said, ultimately it's about tax and what borrowing that you might have. They're the things you need to think about. And with these type of deals, if you're looking to build a business doing this, you really want to sit down with an accountant in terms of how to set that up and how to make it tax efficient for you. If you want some recommendations for an accountant or the accountant we use, just ping me a message and we'll send those details to you. So Hamid, I hope that answers your question. So the next one I have, which was also on LinkedIn last week, which is Akin Sukunbi. My apologies on pronunciation. I am absolutely terrible when it comes to pronunciation. He's a property investor, and the question was on LinkedIn, as I said, and it's what would be the best way to get into BIR? So buy, refurbish, and refinance. So ultimately, you're purchasing the property, renovating it to add some value, refinancing it by putting a mortgage onto it and extracting possibly most of your initial investment back out of it, or all of your investment, or in some cases even more than your initial investment. So you end up with the property and some cash back to be able to go again. That's essentially what Akin is talking about here in terms of to do that. In terms of the best way to get started, so really, if you take a step back and look at what is this strategy, the strategy ultimately is about buying property and adding value to it. Yeah, so you think about what factors are going to affect that. Well, firstly, you want to buy the property at a good price. You've got two opportunities, really main ones to make money. One is buying at the right price. I'm sure you may have heard the term, you make your money when you buy. That's by buying at a very good price, possibly B&B, depending on where you are in the country. Sometimes that's possible, sometimes it isn't. Then it's about how much value can you add onto that property. So for example, if you take a 3-bedroom house, convert it to a 4-bedroom house, you put a huge extension on the back of it, it's probably going to be worth significantly more than what you started with. But you have to be careful you don't overdevelop, because each street will have a ceiling value, ceiling price in terms of what those houses on that street typically go up to. And when you go beyond that, you're not going to be able to get any more. So for example, if you put gold taps in, you put a swimming pool in the garden, it isn't going to be worth massively more. In some cases, it can devalue it, because a swimming pool will be a headache in a 3-bedroom terrace house. So it's thinking about the things that you want to do, the value that you want to add, how's that going to work. So in this country, typically, especially outside of London, houses are typically based on their location and the number of bedrooms. So is it a 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom house, and what's the postcode? So location is key in terms of value, and then in terms of the value that you're adding, primarily by increasing your bedrooms, on that will help. So if you put, for example, a garage or a conservatory onto the house, that may be nice, it might add a little bit of value, but it may not give you a massive uplift. Things that generally give a huge uplift to a house is a modern finish, nice new bathrooms, nice new kitchen. These are things that show potential buyers, if you were selling, or valuers that are going to come back to value the property for a refinance, that there's been some uplift. So one of the things that we talk about is buying at the right price. Secondly, buying in the right location. Thirdly is adding value that's going to be able to help you get a maximum end value on that property, and then making sure the numbers work. So earlier today, I was speaking to one of my inner circle members. They're looking at purchasing a property, and they're going to add significant value to that, and it'll probably be worth about 300,000 once it's finished. Actually, that's quite high for a buy-to-let type property, particularly around Birmingham. That's not high for a family house, but for a buy-to-let, that's quite a lot of money. Now, when you go later on and put a buy-to-let mortgage on that, when you refinance in a few months' time, you've got to think about what's the criteria for the lenders. How much are they going to lend you? Because now you're going to be restricted by how much rent you can collect. And the rent is going to be the market rent, not what you've been able to push it to. So, for example, if the market rent is £1,000, you just happen to get £1,200, it doesn't mean that's the market rent. The market rent, say, be £1,000, because that's what the surveyor will do. They'll do the research, they'll speak to agents and see what the market rent is. Based on that, they'll then decide how much, the bank will decide, the lender, how much they want to lend to you. So you might have a property that's worth £300,000, but they might only give you £200,000 because the monthly payments need to be a certain percentage of the monthly rent. So you can have quite a lot of money stuck on that. So remember, it's not just about adding enormous amounts of value, it's about making the whole thing work. So Akin, I hope that helps. That kind of gives you an overview in terms of things you need to think about, the kind of key factors when you're looking to purchase, refurbish, and refinance. So let me jump on to the next questions. I've got one here that just come through on YouTube from Zach. Hi Saj, how are you? I'm following you for a long time. Thank you very much, Zach. I appreciate it. There's no point in me doing all these videos and stuff if nobody's watching them. So I really do appreciate you taking the time to watch videos and also to comment as well. Property business, is the market good as compared to London? Thanks. So yes, the property market is very good in Birmingham. There's no doubt about that. But what does that actually mean? Well, the prices are quite high right now. There's lots of people looking to buy. The prices are constantly rising. For the last few years, they've been rising. So maybe 40%, 50% increase in value from where the market was a few years ago. That's a significant rise. But then you have to think about what the challenges you face in this market, because if there's so many people chasing deals, it means it's harder to get the deals. There's not so many deals around. If a seller is easy, it's very easy for a seller to sell a property, let's say through an agent, the for sale sign goes up and the next day the sold sign goes up as well, because the market's that strong. These are also challenges because it means you're not going to get any B&B very easily. And the other challenge that you're going to face around that is because there's so much competition. So it's thinking about what's the strategy you want to do. It's not just necessarily what's the market like. The market is buoyant, the market is active, there's huge opportunities, there's a massive amount of investment happening in Birmingham, there's a lot of big companies moving to Birmingham. HS2, I think will still be happening. I think they've spent so much money now, it's unlikely they will stop to Birmingham, that will complete. That's my view. You know, with all these things going on, there's still Birmingham's going to continue to rise. One of the reasons also for that is if you look at historically, if you go back 20, 30, 40 years, Birmingham generally has been quite suppressed in terms of prices. When you think about it, it's the second city in the country. The prices have never been on par with what's happening in London or Manchester or Sheffield or any of these other places. They've been booming compared to what's been happening in Birmingham. So I think really Birmingham's just catching up, and I think it's got so much more to go. So yes, I think there's opportunities, but it's important to think about the right strategy. And you may have heard me say this many times before. It's not just about deciding where you're going to invest, it's what type of strategy is going to work well there for you, how much money you've got to start with, your ability to be able to borrow finance, what are the skills and resources you're going to bring into it, the timing of the market. All these things are going to be important and going to have an impact on the results based on the type of strategy that you decide to do. So hopefully that helps, Zach. I hope you find that useful. Once again, thank you so much for watching. I've got a couple of questions from LinkedIn, which have just been handed to me, so I'll have a look at those. First one from Nigel. Hi, Saj, can you tell me how corporate lets over 31 days stays in the HMRC criteria? Great question. I'm not sure if I can answer that, because you'll also find there's a number of different opinions. So essentially what Nigel's saying, a corporate let versus how it's so from a HMRC perspective, I think essentially what Nigel is saying is when it's 31 days, it's not considered a short stay. So if somebody stays in a property for more than a month, then they're not a short-term stay. We're talking about in the context of service accommodation here. Whereas a corporate let, how can that be different? Well, first of all, my view is if somebody's staying that long, you could just give them a normal tenancy agreement so that you can just set the higher rate, you can set additional services, but you put them on a normal tenancy agreement. Let's say they're paying you, I don't know, keep the number simple, £100 a night, £3,000 a month. If someone's paying you £3,000 a month with some additional services like cleaning, linen and stuff you're going to be doing, you can still put them on a normal tenancy agreement should you want to. Now, ordinarily, with a license, which is what you use on service accommodation, it means that that person has a home, a fixed abode somewhere else. They're only temporarily staying here. So this issue is around, is it temporary or are they really staying there? Is this their home? And how's that viewed? Because then your taxation implications will be different. Is HMRC viewing this as a short-term stay or is actually a normal tenancy, because it's viewed completely differently? Now, corporate lets is essentially, first of all, just to be clear, I don't think it's the right type of arrangement to have when you're doing service accommodation, corporate lets. People use the phrase because it's a phrase that's understood within the property lettings industry. But a corporate let is essentially, let's say I take a property on from an agent and I say I'm going to corporate let it. What I'm saying is I'm going to take that property on and I'm going to sign an agreement, which is going to be in the name of my company, not me personally. And it's my staff that I employ in that company are going to be staying there. So my company is going to be paying the rent. Well, when you think about service accommodation, that isn't really what's happening. So that's why I believe that's not the right way to do that. It's not the right structure to use when you come to do service accommodation. I think personally you use a lease agreement or use a management agreement, depending on what else is going on in the background and what might be appropriate. One or two, those two documents, I believe, is the right way to do it. It's not a tenancy agreement you've got, and it's certainly not a corporate let that you need to be putting together. But to initiate a conversation with the agent, you might talk about corporate let, just so it's something they understand, they get the context of what you're talking about, and what you're saying is it's not you that's going to be staying there, it's somebody else that's going to be staying there that maybe works for a company. So that's a door opener, it gets a conversation started, but that's not the correct document. So I hope that helps. So the next question also on LinkedIn from James. What options do you have if you don't get the valuation you wanted, so you end up leaving more money than you wanted to in a flip? So James is essentially asking, if he's doing a flip where he's buying a property, adding value, and then refinancing, like the question somebody else asked earlier on, Akin asked, so at the end of it, you're refinancing the property, remortgaging it to extract your money out. And James is saying, when the surveyor comes in for that buy-to-let mortgage in a few months' time, and the surveyor doesn't agree with your valuation up here, they come down with a figure down here, it's not the one that you thought you were going to get. Let's say, keep the number simple, let's say you thought it was worth 100,000. They've come back and they said it's worth 90,000. Now, the issue is, when you get a survey, what is that? It's ultimately an opinion of a qualified expert. A qualified expert, someone who understands property, values property, that's what they do day to day, but it's still an opinion. It's not scientific calculation. That means you can get another surveyor from over here and another surveyor from over here, blindfolded, you put them into the same property, you give them the same information. They could potentially come up with different valuations. Why is that? The reason is because it's their opinion, it's their understanding of the world, the environment, what you're doing, how you're doing things, what they think you've done, what value you've added, how they feel that day when they turn up at the property. All these things will impact your valuation. Now, if you get what we sometimes call a down valuation or a low valuation on a property, a down val, what you could do is go back and challenge it. In my experience, it's very, very difficult to get those overturned, because if you think about what you're asking, you're saying, hey, Mr. Miss Expert, the surveyor, I think you're completely wrong. Even though you're qualified, you're the expert, I have no qualification in this area, I think I'm right and you're wrong. That doesn't really sit very well with surveyors, and they're not necessarily going to accept your viewpoint. You've got to come up with some solid data, some strong arguments or cases for them to even want to consider it. Now, how can we avoid these problems, or how can we resolve the issues? So the first thing is, if you're already in this situation where you've had a down valuation, my view is switch to another lender, start again with a different lender. Now, if, for example, you're using a certain type of lender, you can find out what surveyors they use. Sometimes it's possible to get that information, and you can talk to the surveyors beforehand about what their view on the market is, as though you're going to have a private valuation. Sometimes you can't get the information. Those surveyors only work for that lender, and you're not going to get access to them beforehand. You're not looking to influence them, you're just looking to understand their thinking about valuations, the market, their viewpoint, how they value houses, what they think they're worth right now. Is the market rising? Is it quite slow? If a property on these streets have been sold for this, and this, and the market been rising this percentage of the last year, what would their view be on that? So what you're doing, you're arming yourself with the understanding of how they're going to calculate this before they come out. So you can think about that and think, actually, is that something that I'm going to be able to provide them data-wise to help them with that? So when you have another survey that comes out, what you want to do is give them as much data as you possibly can to help with that valuation. So what do I mean by that? You're not really looking to influence the surveyor. The surveyor is not going to come up with a figure just because you've asked them to. That's not going to be the case. What you can do is give some guidelines as to why you think it's worth that. So, for example, if you think a house is worth £100,000, why do you think it's worth £100,000? Well, if it's just because you think it is, that's not going to be accepted. But if you say, well, actually, number 37 over here and number 13 over here and the one on the street behind at number 6, they've all sold in the last 6 months. There have been similar properties. They've sold for this much. This is why I think it's worth this. The market is still rising. Here's some letters from some 2 local agents. We think this will be the marketing price, and this is what we think would achieve on a sale. All this type of data is more solid, and they can use that to kind of say, okay, that's fine, I understand that, and I can see how you've arrived at that figure and likely to accept that figure. So that's one of the ways. So what you're doing is, or a couple of ways. One is you're talking to the surveyors before they actually come out with the valuation, just to kind of get a sense of where they are. Number 2 is to provide good solid data when they turn up. Now, some surveyors will not take any information from you. When you turn up at the property to give them access, they might not take anything from you. Others will appreciate the fact that you went out your way to collate all this data for them to make their life easier. Because remember, you're not telling them that's what the figure is. You're saying, here's my research. The other thing you want to include in that is what work you've done on the property. Because some surveyors will turn up and say, right, you bought this property for £70,000 3 months ago, and you've redecorated it, and now you think it's worth £100,000. Why do you think it's worth £100,000? You say, well, I bought it from a distressed seller. It was BMV. That's why I bought £70,000. And their argument might be, well, if you pay £70,000 for it, and all you've done is given it a lick of paint, it's still worth £70,000. Here's your £70,000 valuation. Now, that's not what you're looking for. So you should be able to demonstrate how you've added value to that property, photographs, video, refitted the kitchen, new bathroom, electrics, upgraded certificates, whatever it might be, anything you can show that you've added value, whether it's a schedule of works as well, along with the evidence, all that will help. Because ultimately, so what you're doing is just helping the surveyor reach a figure which you think to be more favorable, and you're not telling them what you think it will be. So hopefully that's a few suggestions there that will help you, James, with that. So let me just grab some of these. So I've got a question here from Xiaoming on Facebook. Is can my company buy to let properties? If so, how much management fee my company allowed to charge? I'm not sure if I fully understand the question, but what I think the question is if you own properties in your personal name and you have a business that's a limited company, and if you do property management within that business, is that something you can do? If that's your question, absolutely, you can have a company that manages your property for you. And effectively what you're doing, I think, is you're moving some of the profit rather than coming into you as rental income at a bigger profit. You're reducing that figure by first sending the money into a management company, just like any letting agent would collect that rent. So let's put some numbers around it. Let's say your rent is £500 and there's a 10% management fee, so that's £50. So if you gave that to a letting agent to manage, they'd collect £500 of rent, they'd deduct a £50 property management fee, and they'd send you £450. And that £450 is your income minus the cost, whatever, in terms of what you'd be paying the tax on. Now, let's say you only had £400 coming out of £450. So that reduces on paper the amount of profit that you had from that property, which means effectively you're reducing your tax. But the reason you're reducing your tax is because you've actually had less money. So the other £100 may be in your management company. So what can you charge? What would be a fair amount to charge? Well, actually, you could charge pretty much what you like, but it needs to be sensible, and it needs to be at market rates. So are there some letting agents that charge 5 or 6%? Yes, they are. And are there some that charge 20% plus? Yes, they are, and depending on what type of service you have. So in our agency, I think, if I can remember correctly, because I own a letting agency as well, particularly for HMOs in Birmingham, I think it ranges from 8 to 20%, depending on what type of setup that we have and what type of work the landlord wants us to do. So there, what you can do with those properties, you can set a rate that you feel is fair and reasonable, and you can move some of your income to the limited company, if that's a question I think you're asking. But then you also have to think about, as I mentioned earlier in this Q&A today, that a limited company is a separate legal entity. So now that money is not yours, that £100 that you deducted from the £500 that's sitting inside the limited company actually belongs to the limited company. So you got to think about, how do you get that out? How are you going to use it? Because you'll have taxation on that as well. You'll have possibly corporation tax to pay if you've got profit within the company, and dividends that you're going to extract out of the company as well. So all these things need to be considered when you're managing property through a limited company. And of course, depending on the amount of properties and the amount of income you're talking about, you've got to look at how viable it might be. If it's one property with £500, it maybe it's not worth the effort managing a separate limited company for this purpose. But if it's a case of the figures are much higher, it might be worth looking at that. So hopefully that's answered your question. Let me jump onto the next ones here. So I've got a question from Mubarak Ibrahim. This is a question previously on YouTube, and his question is, how can I call agents landlords telling them of my plans so they have a good idea rather than going to view and get rejected? I'm in London looking for rent to service accommodation in and around Reading. So essentially, Mubarak, if I understood correctly, what you're saying is that you are looking for rent to service accommodation properties in the Reading area. You're based in London. What you're probably finding is that you're saying you want to view a property, you go out and look at it, you start a conversation with them about you want to rent to service accommodation, and they say not interested, and the whole thing's been a waste of time for you. So how do you avoid that? Well, one of the things you can do, and this is a numbers game, one of the things you can do is just be a little bit more open with the agent up front. So you could use language like, when you rang up about the property, say, hey, I'm calling about 4 Acacia Avenue. Who is in your office that's dealing with that? Can I speak to them? Great. Hi, Fred. My name is Saj. I'm calling about number 4 Acacia Avenue. My understanding is you're the person dealing with the let. So what can you tell me about it? So let them just tell you a little bit about the property. They might ask you some questions as well in terms of who it is and who you're looking for. And I'd always answer the question, but answer with another question. So for example, say, who's it for you? Who's it for? Say, yeah, I'm looking for the property. So tell me, what condition is it in? So you're kind of deflecting the question back. You're answering a question. So you're not refusing to answer a question. You're answering a short way, but make sure you add another question on that keeps the conversation going. So you want to learn a little bit about the property. Assuming you've looked online, you understand that it fits your requirements, the room sizes, pictures. That gives a lot of information just by jumping on Rightmove, Zoopla. You'll get a lot of the data that you need before you even pick up the phone or before you go to look at the property. then really what you want to understand is, are they going to be open to this type of arrangement? So then you might use the language we touched on earlier on, like a corporate let. Can you tell me, would your landlord be open to a corporate let? So that might be one approach. Or it may be that you say, would your landlord be open to a long-term let with no maintenance or a guaranteed rent? So you start the conversation on the phone before you even actually get over to the property. Now, you're probably going to get a lot more no's on the phone, but what you're going to do is save yourself a journey, particularly if you're in London and you're traveling to Reading to do viewings and you're getting rejected, to start the conversation beforehand. Now, let's say they say, oh, no, our landlord would be interested in that. I say, yeah, that's okay, I understand. And so can you tell me, what other properties do you have available right now where a landlord would be open to a corporate let? So you accept that that's a no, that's fine, and you still ask another question. So don't give up. Effectively, you're asking, so what else? If not this one, then what else? Now, some of them will just want to get rid of you because they're not interested. Some of them don't really understand what you're saying, and they'll just kind of like want to end the conversation. Yeah, no, we don't do that kind of stuff. Thank you very much. Without really even understanding it, without even knowing if the landlord would accept it, or without even considering it for any other properties. But sometimes it might be a specific landlord, might not, and you're asking what other properties might. Or it may be that there's another property it might work with. And if it is the case, then you start the conversation there. So essentially what you could do to avoid some of these rejections is to open up the conversation earlier on rather than waiting until you get to the property. So hopefully that's useful. I hope that answers your question. Let me see what else we've got here. So I've got a question here from Imran Shah on YouTube. Is the best to buy to let a house or a flat? A great question. Well, actually, before we could answer a question like that, you have to think about what is it that ultimately you're trying to achieve? What's the purpose of what you're trying to do? So let's say I'm in Birmingham. My preference is houses because I've got control of the whole building. I can get it at a reasonable price. I can make a profit on the rental. That all works for me, great. Now, if I start going to city centre, I've got an apartment in there. I'm not saying an apartment doesn't work. Particularly in this market, the prices are quite high. I'm buying the property. Even if my numbers work, I've got service charges, ground rent to think about as well on the building, and the lease will be reducing over time as well. So these are the factors that are different between a house, for example, and a flat. Now, sometimes you could have a leasehold flat, a leasehold house, and sometimes you could have a freehold flat, i.e. the other way around. But they're unusual. Generally, you'd have a leasehold flat and a freehold house that you're looking for. Now, let's say you're in certain parts of the country, let's say in London, for example, buying a house, the numbers may just not work. Ultimately, what it comes down to is the numbers. That's what it's about. It's not a case of you'll get a house is better than a flat. It's about how does the whole thing look overall, based on why it is that you want to invest. If you're investing, say, for a profit of X return on your investment, your return on capital employed figure is X percentage. If that's the figure you're working on, then you need to apply that to the flat scenario and the house scenario and say which one works out, which one gives you what you ultimately want. Now, as I said, if you're based somewhere like London, for example, the house prices are so high that maybe your only option is a flat. Now, it doesn't mean you don't invest in flats because the houses are better. Well, actually, you don't have a lot of choice if you want to stay in that location. You have to go with what works for you from a numbers point of view. So hopefully that answers your question. That gives you some ideas there. So how are we doing for time? So I'll do one more before we finish. So this one is from on YouTube. Squinting my eyes, I haven't got my glasses on. So this is from Ghulam Omar. At the end of a mortgage period, I have been interest only. How would I afford the capital repayment due? Sell the property, repay mortgage, switch to capital payment. So Ghulam, you've pretty much put most of the answers there. So Ghulam's situation is that he's reaching the end of a mortgage term. So when you take on a mortgage, you'll have, say, 15 years, 20, 25 years, whatever it is. Remember, I can't give you mortgage advice, financial advice. I'm not a financial advice. I'm just sharing my knowledge and experience with you. But in a situation like that, if you've taken on a mortgage, say 20, 25 years, and that comes to an end, and let's say it was interest only, what does that mean? Well, if you took on a £100,000 mortgage in the year 2000, and it was a 20-year mortgage, and now we're at 2020, that mortgage period has come to an end, how much do you owe? Well, actually, you still owe the bank £100,000 because all you've been doing each month is been paying the interest. But that's actually what most buy-to-let investors do. They just pay the interest each month. They don't pay down any of their capital because they want to maximize the profit that they're achieving each month. Because that's part of the purpose of buying a buy-to-let. So you get a profit each month on the property and also the capital gain over time as well. There are two ways of making money from a buy-to-let typically. Now, if you are in that situation where you've ended up with a property, if it's a buy to let, one of the ways you could deal with that is you could take on a new mortgage. I'm assuming the property is worth significantly more than it was when you first took the mortgage out, and now the properties have recovered through a dip and kind of gone up. Again, depending on where you are in the country, the numbers may not necessarily be the case. But let's say you were somewhere in Birmingham or the Midlands, the price is significantly more than what they were 20 years ago. Now, in that situation, you could take out a new mortgage, which wipes out the old one, and you just continue on an interest-only basis. Again, of course, you could always sell the property. Let's say there hasn't been that much growth. Let's say, as some people are, let's say you took on an 85% buy-to-let mortgage. Assuming the house was worth £100,000, you borrowed £85,000. And today, you're not able to get an 85% mortgage. You're only able to get a 75% mortgage. So that means either you need to put your hand in your pocket, put some cash into the deal, and get a new mortgage at a lower rate, or if that's not possible, it may be that selling the property is the only option to kind of get out of it. You might end up with a little bit of profit, maybe not much tax to pay then because the prices haven't really changed very much over that period of time. So really, it's thinking about the overall context of the deal before you can decide what to do. But the options that you mentioned are pretty much the key ones. So remortgaging the property, selling the property, or you could switch to a repayment mortgage, which starts paying down the debt. Now, let's say this was a home of yours and you're living in the property. Well, you may not necessarily want to sell it. And if you remortgage it now, interest-only mortgages for homes have pretty much disappeared. So you don't get an interest-only mortgage on a home. Now, if you're taking on a repayment mortgage is going to be based on how much you're earning, what's your affordability. So it's not the value of the property on its own that's important. It's about how much you can afford to pay. And they'll take all your expenses into consideration. So they can assess your affordability to calculate how much you can borrow. So you need to sit down with a mortgage broker, have a chat with them about those figures, and then work out. But you certainly have a few options. It's not the end of the world just because you've reached the end of your mortgage term. So I think we're pretty much out of time. Thank you so much once again for giving up your time to be here. Hopefully I'm adding value. Look, I've got lots of videos on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn. Make sure you connect. Let me know if you're finding these useful. We've started a new year. It's the first week back and I've been flat out busy today. Almost lost my voice, amount of time I've kind of spent on calls and conversations today with people. Tell me what your goals, your ambitions for this year, what it is that you want to achieve in 2020 with your property business, and let me know how I can help you get further faster in your property journey. And I look forward to seeing you here same time next week at Monday at 8 o'clock. Thank you so much.